the Hopevale podcast. I'm Tamara Schlatter, the Bay City Campus Director, and I'll be your host as we dive into our current sermon series, Kingdom Manifesto, the Revolution of the Blessed. Jesus launched a movement that completely redefines success. In this series, we're walking through the Beatitudes, learning what it looks like to live beautifully and courageously in a world that is longing for something different. I'm joined by Pastor Josh Pardee and Pastor Nate Murray as we unpack what it looks like to be poor in spirit. The Beatitudes are a series of statements made by Jesus teaching us what it means to be blessed. So Josh, you defined blessed as this good life, this idea of the good life. And you talked about how people are always chasing the good life, and there's evidence of this in the new year with people making New Year's resolutions. So, do you have a New Year's resolution?
Ooh, good question. Well, first of all, good to see you all. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
2026 to all of those tuning in. So what we ended up doing this year, we were actually with some friends during New Year's, and they have a tradition where they do bingo. So you write out 25 different goals that you have, but they can be fun goals. It's not overwhelming. So it's I want to try a new food, or we want to go on this trip, or, so you kind of put some things that you're pretty sure are going to happen, but then also you can put some things that are health goals or financial goals or Bible reading goals. That's or good. Those sorts of things. So it's kind of fun. It was a fun exercise, all four of us, in a typical Michigan kind of way. We were playing euchre while kind of writing out different things that were coming to mind, and then we all wrote out all of our different goals. So I have 25 of them, different health goals, and just it for me, it was a helpful way of these are things that I don't know if anyone else has this, where it's there's a bunch of things operating in my brain. They're they need to be done out there, but then I put them onto paper, and then I get a little bit of dopamine hit from accomplishing what I already need to accomplish.
Well, if you write it down, you have to do it. Right. Or if you tell somebody, then you there's accountability now. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. What happens when you get bingo?
Well, that was my first question, because they texted us before. They're like, hey, we do this thing. Do you want to do it? And I was like, first question, how do I win?
Yeah, unsurprisingly.
To which they were not surprised by, and then they just laughed at and said, you can't win. But then what they did is they did it with some other people last year, and then they all sent in their totals of the ones that they had accomplished.
Oh,
so it wasn't even how many bingos you got.
So that's how you win, if whoever got all 25.
Yeah, exactly.
You have it laminated, ready to mark them off.
How many have you knocked off already in the first 5 days?
Zero. I did try and put some that were a little more stretching, things that I know are going to get done, but I tried to add a little, 10%, 20% to it of
That's good.
Going that next step. So,
and where does compliment your executive pastor lie on the bingo?
That I don't even need. That's not even a goal. That's just I can't help but. It's a part of who I am.
Yeah.
How about you guys? You guys got any goals?
I don't do New Year's resolutions, but I'm working on framing as just a life strategy, how we frame things. And so I'm using a quote from a book that I read a couple years ago. The story you live in is the story you live out. And I'm choosing to frame things this year through that lens of what's the story I'm living in, because that's the story I'm living out. So trying to remember that through the year. So that's
awesome.
My version.
I love that.
Yeah. How about you, Tamara?
Physical health. I didn't start with the new year, started it a couple months ago, but just trying to prioritize that for myself. And life tends to revolve around children still. So
you chose that right before the holidays?
No,
that's good.
No, it was part of my performance assessment. Remember?
I know. I'm just pointing out the difficulty of doing that right before Thanksgiving.
All of the weight I lost, I gained back over the holiday. So I'm neutral instead of having gained.
Perfect.
That's the way I'm choosing to frame it as a positive.
Yeah. That's the story you're living in.
That's the story I'm living in. Is that I worked really hard ahead of the holidays that I could enjoy them and not put myself in a negative position.
Josh texted me something about sugar and cheese, I think, right after Christmas. And actually I was like, have I had enough cheese? I was like, I haven't hit the cheese hard enough.
We were trying to work on solidifying some things, and it was amongst all the sugar and cheese you're eating.
Yes. Well, so people who know me know that I think that cream cheese is the greatest food in the whole world, and I will argue it to the death.
Wow.
Because if you think of everything that you have at the holidays, all of the good stuff, all of the dips, everything has cream cheese in it. So actually somebody bought me a gift of 6 different flavors of cream cheese for Christmas.
Wow.
That's awesome.
So yes, I'm in favor of eating the cheese.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, maybe we should get serious here. Let's start with the phrase itself that we're talking about this week. Blessed are poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. When Jesus says poor in spirit, what do people often assume that he means? And how is that different from what he's actually saying?
Yeah, I mean, I'd almost want to throw it to you guys too. Of like, what do people? I don't think we have really a lot of vernacular or ideas of what being poor in spirit is. It's just kind of like okay, I guess maybe it's like the antithesis to being prideful. I guess is kind of how I've heard it framed. I don't know. Do you guys have thoughts of like how you've heard it talked about before? I maybe I'd give this even as like a caveat. I feel like what's so fascinating about the Beatitudes is. They're so familiar and we say them all the time, but they almost lose all meaning of what they are. So like even saying the word blessed, like what do we mean by that? What does poor in spirit mean? And we're going to talk about some other ones like meek in a couple weeks. What does meek mean?
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know. How have you guys heard poor in spirit talked about?
I think I'm a fan of defining what it's not also to help define what it is. So to me, it's not being insecure. It's not like lacking confidence, or it's not having low self-worth. That's not what Jesus is talking about. And that's not what humility is either. Yeah. It's not those things. Jesus isn't blessing insecurity, you know?
Sure.
That's not the state that he's describing, but I felt like you did a really good job in your message of setting up what it is. But I think it's helpful to know what it's not also.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard a sermon series
On the Beatitudes.
on the Beatitudes.
Yeah.
So you say it's really familiar, but
Yeah.
I can't remember ever hearing a sermon series on it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, you should stay tuned for the next few weeks.
I think I might.
What do you think about poor in spirit, meaning like having an honest self-assessment? What about that as like a potential definition?
Yeah, I think what Jesus is ultimately getting at, if I'm understanding him correctly, is for sure it's an honest self-assessment. But the honest part is there is humility and humble. I even talked a little bit about like you could almost translate it, I think, as humble, but it doesn't quite get us there because it doesn't carry the connotation of like the neediness that we actually are. We have no way to enter this kingdom on our own, right? So, I think that is self-assessing and being honest with ourselves. And, you know, the antithesis that I gave as an example of that is, I think, the rich young ruler who wants to posture himself as one who's going to enter in the right manner with all the religious ease conversation talk of, I've kept all the commands, I've done all the things. But when push comes to shove, he's not being honest about how he wants to enter in. He wants to enter in on his terms. And so I think if that's what you mean by self-assessment, I think that's spot on.
It's like, I think thinking through how do I accomplish this on my own?
Yeah.
And getting to the end of that and realizing I can't. So it's like, I don't know, you have a dream home that you want to buy and you sit down and you're like, we really want this house. And then you sit down with the budget and you're like, but there's no way. Like there's just like, we don't have enough 401ks to cash out. We don't have we don't have the reserves to make this happen. We are not able to accomplish this. And to me, it's that moment at the end of all that where you've thrown all your resources at something and realized you don't have enough. To me, when I think of poor in spirit, that's the state that he's talking about, is where it's like, okay, I can't. And I've finally grasped that. Now looking toward the blessing of the one who can.
Yeah.
And that is hard for somebody like the rich young ruler who has been so successful in life on his own when they have achieved everything on their own, to realize that you can't achieve heaven on your own.
Yeah, and that's where I think, Jesus, we didn't get into it yesterday, but that's why I think Jesus says it's really hard for the rich to enter the kingdom of God, because it's contrary to how the rest of your life is constructed, and you're used to earning and proving and just all of those things that come along with it. And so the kingdom, that's not how it works. You have to divest yourself of all of that stuff.
Yeah. So I love that as we read through this section of scripture, and you mentioned this in your sermon too, that Jesus is giving us identity before he gives us instruction. So Nate, I know you're extremely passionate about talking about identity in Christ. So how does recognizing that you bring nothing to Jesus help you discover who you truly are in him?
Wow. Well, I thought about this a little bit during your message yesterday and listening to it again this morning. We deal a lot in assessments in our world and our culture. So personality assessments, like workplace assessments, all those things. And like there's these different trends where it's like identify your weaknesses and attack them, or like identify your weaknesses and ignore them and like give them up and just never try to address them and just focus on your strengths. And I had a mentor a long time ago that talked about that with identity and talked about the importance of dependence, and that when it comes to our identity in Christ, the key thing is to depend. But if we're not careful, we end up totally independent, which is not what it means to be poor in spirit. It's the opposite of poor in spirit, where if I know my strengths and my weaknesses, whether they be spiritual gifts or my Enneagram or, you know, my, I'm trying to think all these other assessments.
Myers-Briggs.
Yeah, all these
stuff,
different
yeah.
ones that we do, strength finders. If I know my strengths and my weaknesses, what I'll do is I'll focus on my strengths because I've got this.
Right.
And spiritually speaking, that's an area where I'm not going to depend because I don't need to, at least in my mind, if I'm operating independent of Jesus. So these things that I'm strong in, I'm going to do in my own power. And then the things that I'm weak in, I'm taught to just don't focus on those. Let other people who are strong in those areas handle those. So it's like, I don't need to handle that because Josh is good at that. So I'm not going to depend there either. And the danger is you end up in this place where you're not depending in your strengths or your weaknesses.
Right.
You're just totally operating independent. So when it comes to identity, I think it's that same thing we were talking about being poor in spirit. It's doing that honest self-assessment to say, on my best day, I still need Jesus. On my worst day, I obviously need Jesus, and every day in between. That if I start with who I am in him and I allow him to work in and through me, that's where the magic happens. That's where I experience all that Christ has and what Scripture teaches us, that in him we have everything that we need for life and godliness. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yeah, and I think, what comes to my mind as you're saying that too is like, what we're not saying, again, back to that being a helpful way of framing all this, is that you shouldn't have strengths, or
Right.
that we don't have strengths, or that we shouldn't work on
Absolutely.
our strengths, right? But there's a difference in me just like, again, thinking that I'm the one who's doing all of this work, right? So, I'll just take my role, right? Like, if I'm teaching on a Sunday or whatever, right? Like, there's things that I could probably do within just different skill sets that I have, right? And so the temptation is to try and make it about myself, or to not be dependent, or to not spend time in prayer or sitting before God, or all of those things. And that's actually like, that's the work that it's very tempting to move past, because it's just like, whatever, I can, we can put together some points here and all that sort of stuff. But it's like, it's the sitting, it's not avoiding different strengths that we have, but it's like being honest and saying, okay, Jesus, what is it that you have here? And what do you want to
Inviting
be saying?
him into all of it.
Right. Like, that's practically how it plays out in that very specific context of my life. But I think then that you can extrapolate that to all of our lives, right? Of like, we're not saying don't have strengths or don't use your strengths. That would actually be the opposite of what we want to do in the kingdom. You're given gifts and tools, and we're called to be image bearers and kings and queens in the kingdom that have roles and responsibilities. So we're not saying that, but it's the posture in which you enter into that, of thinking that you can handle this all on your own, or being dependent on the king who's inviting you into his way of living in the kingdom. And I think that's like getting at a little bit of the idea of being poor in spirit.
Yeah. So living our identity through Jesus, then, how does that change obedience from striving to responding? You talked about this a little bit yesterday, to stop trying to climb your way into the kingdom and collapse your way into the kingdom. So how does that change obedience?
Yeah, well, I think, and we do, I mentioned, I gave like a little teaser of it yesterday. We go over this in Apprenticing Jesus pretty clearly. I think there's a reality where we are constantly trying to feel like we've earned enough, because this is the world we live in at work or in society, or having enough, whatever, Instagram followers or whatever is a direct connection to the things that you've accomplished or whatever, right? And so we carry all of that baggage into our relationship with God, of thinking that this is how we gain status, this is how we gain recognition or influence or any of those things. And what we find is that the exact opposite is true, right? So Jesus' biggest critiques of the people that he's doing life with are the ones who are showing how religious they are and are doing it in a manner that isn't poor in spirit. They're literally doing all the right things for the most part. You know, I mean, there's some moments where they aren't, but for the most part, they're actually doing the things that Jesus would want them to do it. It's how they're going about it and what they're trying to receive from that. And I think, like, we've all been in that space where you're trying to grasp for identity from the different things that you've done, want to do, receive, all of that sort of stuff. And so, yeah, I think the reversing of what we go over as the triangle in apprenticing Jesus is to say, listen, God is not going to be any more pleased with you if you do those things or don't do those things. Like that, at least not from a sense of like your identity. Your identity is not at risk, right? And so, you know, our families are such powerful examples because that's the language God gives us. But it's, you know, my kid, whether he does something that he should or shouldn't, or she does something that she should or shouldn't, it never puts at risk their identity of being a Pardee, right? Like it's just not even on the table.
Right.
And so my hope is that as they learn what it means to live in the Pardee household and to be a Pardee through times of successes and failures and learning opportunities and all those different things, that they begin to live in the way that, you know, like it was just Christmas break, right? So I was just with all of my extended family, my brothers and parents and stuff. And so there's a lot of us when we all get together. And it's fun for me to see my kids see like everybody else being together and kind of how we interact and do things, because there's so many similarities. I mean, we're all different, but you can definitely sense like this DNA that's running through our family, if you will, right? Well, that's never at risk, but I trust that as my kids continue to live into this, they naturally begin to pick up on it. And, you know, I was talking to some of my kids on the way home of like, hey, did you see how your uncles just like jumped in and helped out with cooking the food and cleaning up and asked what could be done? And like, you know, like as opposed to like, why do I have to go do the dishes, or why, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, but I'm trying to give them a bigger vision of like, so it's not even trying to tell them like you need to obey because we need this to happen. I mean, sometimes that does happen, right? But like, I'm trying to give a bigger vision of like, no, this is who we are. And I think that's part of what Jesus is doing, is he's saying, or to your question, I should say, of like, when we receive our identity, we're naturally compelled to start living into that, because it's actually the way of the good life, right? Like you start to experience all of the things that you were made to long for and want to experience. So the contrast is we enter this conversation thinking that the good life is, you know, all of the different things that we imagine it is: financial security, the second house, all the trips, whatever it is. But what you get from the Beatitudes is, if you will live into this manifesto that Jesus has, it's actually going to give you the centering, the fulfillments of your hearts, the longings that you really have, some things that you're not even aware of, that you're trying to satiate yourself with, you know, like a junk food sort of diet, if you will. And God's literally like, no, I have so much better for you. I have richer, deeper things here for you if you will sit in this. Which is really difficult, though, because, again, we live in this world that's constantly trying to grab our attention, distract us, invite us into different versions, kingdoms, stories, as you said, to live into, thinking that that's going to get us to the good life. So the real question and the rub of the whole sermon is are we going to trust in Jesus' way, or are we not?
Right. And there's so much freedom when we choose to live into our identity from Jesus, instead of, like you said, the world's trying to pull us in different directions and distract us. And there's not freedom in that. Like, there's so much healing in not having to worry about what everybody else thinks about you, and just worrying about what Jesus thinks about you, which is that he loves you, right? And that leads me to my next question. You talked about, it's actually another thing that you talk about in Apprenticing Jesus, good advertisement for the class, that Jesus is high invitation and high challenge. And so what's the invitation that he's offering in the Beatitude, and what is the challenge in being poor in spirit? What's the invitation? What's the challenge there?
I mean, I think I want to say that the invitation is the good life, right? So it's going to be a little bit of where I just kind of left it, of like, he has a vision for our lives, for how the world should work, and we'll see this in the weeks ahead, who even gets to run the world in the end. So he has a vision for what the good life is. So that's the invitation. Do you want this? But the challenge is like where we're going to I mean, I think they're all very challenging, because the idea of even how he starts of being poor in spirit confronts everything within me. But it's going to even escalate as we continue to move through, because it's going to be, there's going to be potentially persecution and a difficult path ahead for those who want to live in this kingdom. So is that something that you want? Are you willing to be isolated, or to be misunderstood, or to be misrepresented, or all of those things? And this is the story that Jesus' followers literally experience right after he ascends to the heavens. And we see that, the early Christians are greatly misunderstood by Rome. There's all of these accusations that are made of them, that they're drinking the blood of people that they've killed or something like that, because they're gathered around this meal called communion, right, where they're remembering the blood of Jesus. And so there's accusations about that. There's accusations about, they're living sexually very different than everyone else is in Rome at the time. And so there's accusations about that. Like there's all of these misrepresentations where they're pushed to the margin. And so, culture shifts and moves in different seasons, sometimes rapidly, sometimes slowly, sometimes at different paces in different parts of the world. I think we're always going to find ourselves in that moment is a potential moment. The flip side of that moment is the church becomes this influential thing 300 years later, so much so that it becomes the main religion, if you will, of Rome, and Constantine's a part of that. And there's problems that come along with that, but it shows how the church goes from living on the margins and being completely misunderstood to now being centered in society. I think we live our lives somewhere in that spectrum that's kind of always shifting. And so part of the work that we have to do is identify which moment are we in, and what does it look like to live faithfully. I actually think that that's a big problem that the church has had throughout history, is maybe misidentifying what that moment is. There's moments where we have a more centered position, and we want to claim that we're being persecuted. And there's moments where we don't know how to live as the minority or the persecuted, because we're used to wanting to be centered or having centered or all of those things. So I think there's a bit of a spectrum there. And part of what we have to do is take an inventory of, and that can look different even, I'm not even talking like nationally, like that can look different in community by community.
Yeah.
It can, whatever, we live in Michigan, so you have school of choice. It could be you have one kid at one school and one kid at a different school, and they're living two very different realities, right? And so that's where I think the Beatitudes are so helpful, is that they're giving us language and imagination for understanding all of that, and kind of going deeper into what moment am I in, and how do I be the person who can live in either of these spaces.
That's good.
Yeah. And you have to be willing to live differently than the rest of the world around you. Like that's what's happening in all of these, is that you're going to be, it's that upside down kingdom mentality. We talked about that last night in youth. We were talking about Daniel and choosing not to eat the king's food. And, we all want to make a difference, but are we actually willing to be different in order to make a difference?
Yeah. Thinking of a quote, I'm not going to be able to pull it off the top of my head, but it might have been Kierkegaard. He said something to the effect of, our biggest fear isn't, if I'm misquoting this, then I'm really sorry, but someone can Google it later. Our biggest fear isn't being wrong, it's being alone. So, right? So it's like this idea of what you're talking about, of like, I'm willing to be wrong if the majority's going in that direction.
Yeah.
But being alone is a fearful and frightful place, right?
Yeah.
Which is why we have, this is part of why I think we struggle to find really good leaders, is it's hard to stand in a position of being alone or misunderstood or all of those things. It's why we have, maybe it's at different moments why we feel like there's, the church as a whole has abdicated their responsibility of being that voice, because they don't want to be left behind by the world, or seen as someone who doesn't have influence, or all of these different things. And this is why history is so important, because you start to see all of these patterns that emerge, and it's helpful for even understanding our own context.
Well, and going back to the work of identity in Christ, the more that you're secure in who you are in Christ, the less you are concerned with what the world thinks of
Yep.
you.
Yeah. Which is, again, Jesus, right? Like, we see that Jesus is constantly withdrawing. He's constantly being present with the Father. That gives him the strength and the ability to stand in complete peace and confidence that he's right at the center of where he's supposed to be. So I think like a big question to ask is like, do we find ourselves in that moment of like, I can stand here because I think this is where God is, and I'm okay with that. But there's real consequences in our lives for that.
Yeah.
So the invitation and the challenge are really almost the same thing when we're talking about these. And in the context of who Jesus was actually talking to at the time, the invitation and the challenge had very, like, almost physical realities to it, where there was a very real chance if they took a stand with these things that the Roman government was going to arrest them and try them and persecute them and kill them. I mean, there were very real stakes there. So the invitation was a different path, but it was a path that came with danger. It was a path that came with real insecurity in a practical sense. And so for us now, it's different, but it's still that we're invited into a different way of living, a different way of navigating the world that we're in, but it's not going to be celebrated in the ways that the strategies of the world are going to be celebrated. So if it's social status or if it's financial, accomplishments, those kinds of things, those are going to be celebrated in this world. Choosing the path of Jesus is not always going to be celebrated in this world. And those moments you're talking about, those crucial moments will almost never be celebrated,
Right.
Where the kingdom really is taking ground. It seems like that is often a lonely place when you're stepping into those areas where you're the first to take a stand. You're the first to say, no, I'm not going to eat that. You're the first to say, no, I'm not going to say that or watch that or do that. Or the first to say, you know what, I'm going to do this instead. I'm going to take a stand at my school or my workplace or my neighborhood or whatever. So it seems like the invitation and the challenge are one and the same. It's an invitation into a different way of life, but knowing that it may be a lonely place initially.
Great job framing that.
Yeah. I think I love that. I think there's this part too of I'm thinking of coaching. So my kids are in basketball right now, and college football playoffs are going on. So I'm seeing interviews from different coaches that love college football and all this stuff. I saw one coach who said, it was a month or two ago, he said his job as a coach is to essentially be the opposite of whatever the team is. So if the team is, chill and kind of like complacent, then it's his job to hype them up. And if they're hyped up, it's his job to like get them to calm down. Like he's got to be the antithesis to whatever the group is feeling, sort of a thing. And I think that's what good leadership in some senses looks like. So there's moments where you watch bad coaching and it's like the players are all frazzled and the coach is all frazzled and they have nothing to orient themselves to. They have no calming presence, right? That can lead them and guide them. And so as you were saying that, Nate, I was thinking of like the hard part sometimes, this is just my experience, maybe it will resonate or not, is when you're going to take that stand, usually the people that you have to deal with that a lot of times give you the most confrontation. I mean, we're all in different settings, so this could be completely biased by my setting. But it's all the people who are like supposed to be brothers and sisters or like, walking with you in the kingdom who then are now not trusting or concerned or whatever. And sometimes legitimately, like there's a way to go about this dialogue in a helpful way. But sometimes what's interesting about all of that is like the very first people that will kind of step away from you are the people that you would have thought like, no, they're with me in this sort of a thing. And I think that's getting back to, if it is Kierkegaard who's like speaking to like, that's the moment where it's like, yeah, I'd rather go with the crowd than be alone, sort of a thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, we talked about humility a little bit already, but it being the doorway to the kingdom, and that it's really a hard posture to maintain. And so I thought of this song lyric from Josiah Queen. It says, "The funny thing about pride is that you have it all your life, but the moment you think you don't, it's gotten in your eye." What do you think about that?
All right, read it one more time. Read it one more time.
The funny thing about pride is that you have it all your life, but the moment you think you don't, it's gotten in your eye.
Okay, so I'm assuming that's like a log in the eye, speck in the eye reference. Is that your read on that?
Yeah, I mean, the second
Yeah.
that you think that you're fine, you're like, I'm good. I'm not prideful. You probably actually are being prideful.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't listened to all of the songs. So my immediate reaction is, I think, yeah, I mean, pride is something that wells up in us. And that pride is mentioned in various serious ways in the Bible. Like there's some things that we as the church have maybe not historically been great at talking about that are actually really big deals in the kingdom. Pride is one of them. Greed is one of them. Gluttony, like all these things that just kind of get pushed to the side. So yeah, if that is what we mean by that, then totally agree of, I think there's subtle ways that pride enters in that we can, I mean, we just do this as humans all the time where we try and feel superior to other people, or we put ourselves into positions where we're the ones who have like the information that other people don't, or, I don't know, like we have all these little games of like power moves that we play with people and whatnot. So I think, I think there's a way to deceive ourselves where we can think we've rid ourselves, and that is sitting front and center. I think maybe that might be the invitation of what it means to be poor in spirit, of though coming in saying like, what does this look like? Because if you are going to be poor in spirit, the beautiful thing of that is you can't be prideful.
Yeah.
It just abuses you of all of that immediately.
Yeah.
Well, pride, I think, and pride, I don't know, pride is almost trusting yourself more than anyone, and trusting yourself more than God, certainly. So, I don't know, when I think of poor in spirit, I think of open hands, and even if you have a strong conviction about something, it's coming with open hands to say to God, I think this is it. I think this is what you would have me do, but my hands are open. And if you have something different for me, I'm open to what you have for me. And we've even done those postures of prayer at different times in worship at our church, where it's like open hands toward God. But often I think pride is like coming to God with your hands closed, or with like clenched fists,
Right.
like ready to go. It's like, I know what I want. These are the things that I want. And I want you to do this big thing. I want to live in your kingdom, but I want to bring with me these things that I want. And I think maybe some of what that song lyric, I haven't heard that song either, but maybe some of what it's getting at is that type of thing, where if we're going to be poor in spirit, it means having open hands and maintaining those open hands. And even if we feel deep conviction about something, whether it be a relationship or a situation we're dealing with at work, we still come into those things with open hands, because maybe we're taking a step of faith, but within that we're getting something wrong. But if we have open hands in the midst of it, the Spirit can course correct us as we take those steps of faith, because there's times really harmful, hurtful things that we do start with a step of faith that then we go our own direction, So the first step is a step of faith, and we're like, oh yeah, that was what God wanted. And then we
you go do
close
it
our
on your
hands
own.
and firmly go in the direction we want to go.
Yeah.
So it's maintaining that posture of open hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that leads right into the next question. What practices help people stay aware of their dependence on God rather than drifting into self-reliance? How do we stay in that dependency mode?
I mean, I think there's a bunch of different things. I think the antidote to a lot of this is being in deep relationship with a lot of people. Or, I mean, I define a lot how you want. I'm not trying to make it, that doesn't mean hundreds. But when you are in deep relationship with people who find themselves even, and let's expand it to people who are in different spots socioeconomically, it will immediately kind of ground you and force you to be real, and to maybe some of the areas that you want to prop yourself up in as being whatever, incredibly successful or smart or whatever it is. You start to meet other people who maybe are just as smart or whatever, who didn't get the breaks that you got, or I mean, there's a whole variety of things. And also, once people can see the real you, and you're not really that amazing or special. I mean, you're you're God's image. I'm not trying to like put us down in the sense of like in a unhealthy like switch the pendulum, but also just understanding that we're all broken humans.
You haven't walked on the moon.
Yeah, I haven't walked on the moon. Good reference to Brian Regan there. Yeah, so I think that, I mean, that was the first thing that immediately comes to my mind is like, it's really hard to do that when you're in deep community. And the people that I know that are in deep community are some of the most genuine, God-loving, like, people who seem to experience Jesus at profound levels because you can't have all of the shine that you want to, that the rest of the world teaches us to project ourselves with.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about being on staff is that we're constantly asking each other, what is Jesus teaching you? Right? So there's no level of arriving.
Sure.
We're always in process and thinking about where is he at work in our lives and what is he teaching us. So that happens in community.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing, I mean, Jesus is our example. He's our goal. Like, he's the source of our life. And I think one of the most powerful things that he ever said was, I can do nothing apart from the Father. And to hear him say that, to know that he lived in that station where he was constantly dependent on the power of the Father. I can do nothing apart from the Father. That's an incredible statement. And if we remember that he needed to live dependently on the Father in that way, and that he invites us to live dependently on him just as he depended on the Father, that's a great reminder that like whatever we're facing, and it, again, that goes back to the strengths and weaknesses thing. It may be like a part of your job that you're like, I'm really good at this, but I step into it instead saying, I can't do this apart from Jesus, no matter what it is. And it could be like a spreadsheet, or it could be a relationship at work, either one. Like whatever it is, it's, I can't do anything apart from Jesus. Nothing that I do is worthwhile apart from him, but he's given me these gifts, and I'm going to step into these gifts and allow him to use them in a powerful way. And the same thing in the weaknesses too. It's like, I'm stepping into a situation where I know I don't have what I need for this. I don't have the patience that I need. I don't have the compassion. I don't have the wisdom that I need to handle this right. But Jesus, you do. So just practicing that, remembering that Jesus lived in that kind of dependence where he acknowledged, believed, and lived as though he could do nothing apart from the Father. If we do the same thing, then we can apply that at work, at home, with our kids, in our thought life, with our emotions, spiritually, all the way around. Yeah.
Final thoughts?
I'm excited. I'm excited to see where this series is going to go. We have moments where I feel like my poppy, my grandfather, I call him my poppy, he used to talk about flipping the quilt. And there's these moments, if you've ever quilted, there's like the side that you can see on a quilt, but if you flip to the back side, it's not as pretty, but there are all these threads and you get to see how it was made. And you see more of the work. Like you can see the finished product on one side, but if you flip the quilt, you see the work that's gone into it. And we've had moments of that, of what I would call like perspective, at least from my point of view over the last few months, where there have been moments in our Sunday gathering, both in Saginaw and Bay City, moments in staff meetings, moments where I'm with a leader and I'm meeting with them one-on-one, where I just see the back of the quilt and I see all the work that the Spirit's doing to draw things together. And I know where we're headed. I know the things we're working on behind the scenes. And I feel like this series is a big part of what the Spirit has planned for us, not just this year, but the next few years. So I'm really excited to see what will happen when our people realize just how blessed they are. Yeah.
Love that.
Awesome.
I mean, I think we should just end on that word. That was a good word.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to continuing the conversation as we explore Jesus's Kingdom Manifesto. We'll see you next week.